Hello, everyone, and welcome to this global launch of the Kvinna Foundation's new report, which is named They Came Together Not to Be Silenced. This is a report on gender-based violence in conflict and the role of women's organization. My name is Marie Wikström. I'm the Deputy Secretary General of Kvinna, who actually turns 30 years this year. Kvinna Foundation was in fact created during the wars in Yugoslavia. And we were created in a response to the widespread sexual violence committed against women and girls. That spring, we began to support local women's organizations who assisted other women in the middle of the conflict and who worked for women's rights. Since then, unfortunately, in one way, but good in other ways, Kvinna has expanded to support women's rights organizations globally. Today, we work with 150 organizations in around 20 countries in conflict-affected regions. And in the 3 decades since our founding, we have witnessed new wars to break out, with women and girls suffering GBV in one conflict after another. And in many cases, governments have looked the other way, allowing violence to continue and perpetrators to walk free. However, also in these years, we have witnessed something else. We have seen how local women's rights organizations have organized themselves and offered protection, medical and psychosocial support, and legal aid to victim survivors of this violence. They have fought for peace agreements to recognize victims and survivors' rights and needs, and to get GBV legislation in place. These brave women have been able to break the silence surrounding this violence and to bring these horrific crimes on the news agenda into the courts and to the attention of the international community. During this period, and in many instances, thanks to this tireless advocacy work of these women's organizations, international law and norms in relation to conflict sexual violence have been strengthened, and these crimes are now recognized as a matter of international peace and security and is no longer seen just as a collateral damage of war. The report that we proudly are presenting today is about these women who came together not to be silenced. And through this report, we want to acknowledge their work, their achievements, their knowledge, their expertise to create a better understanding of what role they play in addressing all the different complexities when it comes to GBV in conflict-affected countries, and in contributing to a fairer, democratic, and peaceful society. So further in this report, we zoom in to 4 different conflict-affected countries. We look at Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Iraq, and Ukraine. And in today's panel, we are very happy to have women with us from these 4 countries who worked or have worked for organizations that have supported women in the countries that they work in. And we as Kvinna are very happy that we have the pleasure to support these organizations and to work in partnership with them. These women today are amongst 44 women's rights activists that we have interviewed for this report. And it will be very interesting to hear their stories and experience in this panel today. So with that, I will hand over to my colleague, Jessica Pojanrell, who is one of Kvinna's advocacy advisor and also the co-author of this report. And she will introduce all the amazing women in the room today and lead the panel discussion. So I wish you all a very fruitful and interesting panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marie. I am very happy to present this report with the help of our excellent panel today. I'm not sure if I am in the image, but I'll keep talking. In this study, we have looked at gender-based violence in conflict-affected countries, the long-term consequences of it, the work of women's rights organizations that they're doing to address the needs of victims and survivors, but also the obstacles that prevent victims, survivors from accessing support and justice. And in many ways, the four case studies in this report, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Iraq, and Ukraine, are very different contexts in terms of their cultures, legal systems, and types of conflict that they have been plagued by or are plagued by at the moment. Yet the victims and survivors of these countries share many experiences, and women's rights organizations and activists face very similar obstacles. From what we've seen in our 4 case studies, we have identified 6 themes that all contexts have in common, and where we are making recommendations to governments, policymakers, and donors. And these themes are, firstly, the role of women's rights organizations in conflict-affected countries. Secondly, the importance of acknowledging other forms of gender-based violence in addition to the conflict-related sexual violence. Thirdly, the importance of paying more attention to stigmatization as an obstacle to access support and justice. Number 4 is the importance of paying more attention to the productive pressure that women and girls experience during and after conflict. Number 5 is the fact that working against gender-based violence puts women human rights defenders at risk. And lastly, that the work against gender-based violence also is work for peace and security. And we won't be able to discuss all 6 themes and go through all the recommendations in detail today. So I encourage you all to also look at the report after this panel discussion and read the recommendations. But now let me introduce the speakers in our panel, and please welcome Adriana, who is Senior Legal Advisor at Trial International from Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Welcome, Adriana.
Hello.
And Dus, who is Director of OESO Africa Initiative, Democratic Republic of the Congo. Welcome, Dus. And also Awas from DAC Organization for Yazidi Women Development in Iraq. And Marta, hi. And Marta, who's the founder of Women's Perspective in Lviv, Ukraine. Welcome, Marta. Great. Now, we will start by talking about our first common theme in the report, which is the role of women's rights organizations. And what we found is that in all 4 case studies, high levels of conflict-related sexual violence and other forms of gender-based violence occurred as a result of the conflicts, but states have been more or less unprepared or unable, and in some cases even unwilling to provide victims and survivors with sufficient support to hold perpetrators to account. And in 3 out of 4 contexts, there was no legal framework to address conflict-related sexual violence and other forms of gender-based violence at the outbreak of war. None of the peace agreements included provisions for the state to address conflict-related sexual violence or other forms of gender-based violence. And all of this made it almost impossible for victims and survivors to get protection, support, legal aid, and in some cases, there has been near total impunity for perpetrators. And due to the lack of government response, the absence of legal framework, local women's rights organizations have played an essential role in protecting victims and survivors, offering medical and psychosocial support, and calling for legal accountability and redress. They have also been instrumental in driving change, including legislative change, implementing new practices, and dismantling harmful norms and attitudes. And in spite of their work, they remain severely underfunded in most contexts, and their expertise is often not taken into consideration. So my first question on this topic of the role of women's rights organizations is to you, Adriana. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, there were no gender-based violence legislation before the war. There were no specialized services for victims and survivors. And the Dayton Peace Agreement did not specifically recognize women's rights, nor did it mention that the state had a responsibility for prosecuting perpetrators of conflict-related sexual violence or other forms of gender-based violence, or for providing shelters and rehabilitation for survivors of the violence. So my first question to you, Adriana, is what role has the women's rights movement had in the country to ensure that women did get help, support, and justice after the war?
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for organizing this discussion, which I'm very much looking forward to. And thank you for having me. I wish also to use this opportunity to congratulate Kvinna for producing this insightful and useful report. So coming back to your question, the role of women's rights organizations in Bosnia and Herzegovina was crucial, and it was twofold. It was a role of service providers and also agents of change. Our country was completely unprepared and unable to provide victims with support needed during and in the aftermath of the war. And it was quite different from what we see now in the Ukraine. And also, as the years went on, there was a lack of response by the country and absence of adequate legal frameworks, which would lead to providing victims with support, with the redress they deserve, and to holding perpetrators accountable. So their first role, as I mentioned, was the role to provide services. In response to this, they stepped in. They set up organizations while the war was still ongoing to respond to immediate needs during the war. They set up shelters, provided protection, medical, psychosocial, legal aid to victims of CRSV, but also to other forms of gender-based violence, as well as to women and children who have lost their homes and their family members. Their work to address conflict-related sexual violence laid actually the foundations for the subsequent introduction of legislation on different forms of gender-based violence and for setting up a state-provided service and services for those victims. Apart from that, women's rights organizations have had a very important role to drive changes through their policy research, through training of authorities, through awareness raising, strategic human rights litigation, through advocacy work, including submitting shadow reports on our country, bringing domestic problems to the attention of the international community. We have been introducing legislative changes, policy changes, aimed at recognizing victims of conflict-related sexual violence and their rights, and this enabled improved service provision to victims. We have influenced various prosecutorial and judicial practices. We have tackled stigmatization of CRSV victims, and more general, we have been addressing some harmful stereotypes and attitudes. And we have continuously called for legal accountability, for redress, and for the implementation of relevant international human rights standards related to gender-based violence victims.
Thank you so much for giving us that picture of all the different types of work that the women's rights organizations are doing. And what would you say have been the hardest struggles and the most important victories?
The hardest struggles, and I don't know, I'm not sure if I can speak in past tense, they're still ongoing. There have been many challenges, and there are many challenges to introduce changes of laws, policies, and changes of mindsets in a patriarchal society plagued by war, with complex and inefficient administrative structures, and with many political obstructions of all war crimes related topics. But one of the most important victories, which I would like to single out, was the various adoptions of and improvements of the legislation on civilian victims of war. There was a special moment in the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina when in 2006, persons who had suffered rape or sexual abuse were recognized as a specific category of civilian victims of war without having to prove their physical visibility. And this allowed them to apply for monthly allowances, which was life-changing for them at that moment. This happened after intense lobbying by women's rights organizations, by artists, journalists, activists, survivors, female MPs. Actually, in March 2006, there was a VIH premiere of the award-winning movie Grbavica, that tells the shocking story of a woman who was raped and gave birth to a daughter as a result of that act. And at that very date, a campaign to amend legislation and improve the rights of survivors was officially launched. It was called For the Dignity of Survivors. So the activists, including survivors themselves, gathered about 50,000 signatures, including 30 women MPs. And they were finally submitted successfully to the Parliament of the Federation, which then adopted those important legislative changes. Another important victory, which I would like to single out, has been the fact that under big pressure and as a result of strategic advocacy efforts undertaken by women's rights organizations and associations of victims, the Prosecutor's Office of Bosnia and Herzegovina started in the last decade, beginning with 2014, to prioritize the prosecution of conflict-related sexual violence, which had been until then regarded somehow as a lesser crime, right? So slowly, both prosecutorial and judicial staff started to change attitudes towards those victims and their suffering. And on top of that, in 2015, we triggered the first historic award of compensation in criminal proceedings to a victim of CRSV. This was a first in the Balkans and a first for all war crimes victims in this region. And since then, it became common practice in Bosnia and Herzegovina with regard to victims of conflict-related sexual violence. Later on, we introduced some legislative changes which provided for the obligation of the Ministry of Justice to legally represent victims in criminal proceedings, victims of gender-based violence. And this all together led slowly to the strengthening in criminal proceedings of a victim-centered approach, which all actors involved took towards working with them. And on this occasion, it is important to note that this change was at that time facilitated by the increased focus and the action of the international community and international organizations in terms of raising awareness about the importance to properly deal with those crimes through the PSVI initiative, through official visits to our domestic authorities, for instance, that the special representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence and Conflict, through adopting new resolutions, the issuance of recommendations of UN special procedures, UN treaty bodies towards Bosnia and Herzegovina on how to improve the situation, through investing into civil society organizations' actions and the capacity of the prosecutors' offices and the courts, and capacity building efforts in general. At that time, you could really feel it made a difference. And this shows the importance and the crucial role that the international community and international organizations can play to support and advance the women's rights organizations' fight on the ground.
Great, thank you for giving us all those examples of the important victories that you've had, but also for raising the importance of having this cooperation and the support from the international community. Sometimes when I tell people that the Kvinna Foundation work in conflict-affected countries and one country is Bosnia, the reaction is Bosnia. There hasn't been a war there for 30 years. Why are you still working there? And could you tell us something about, it's been 30 years. Are you still working with issues related to the war?
Oh, yes, unfortunately we are. Unfortunately, it took a very long time for some things to change and some problems to be addressed, and they're still struggling with many issues. These past 3 decades, women's rights organizations have been continuously lobbying for legal reforms to ensure that all victims in the country get improved access to rights and equal rights as civilian victims of war. But still, CRSV survivors from different parts of the country have very different scope of rights and different conditions for accessing those rights, for applying for the status of victim, depending on their place of residence. Women's organizations have been at the forefront of advocacy for the adoption of strategic documents at the state level, like, for instance, the Transitional Justice Strategy or a draft law on the protection of the victims of torture in Bosnia, which would ensure equal treatment of victims. But still, these attempts have so far failed due to political reasons. Other than that, for instance, in the entity of Republika Srpska, the deadline for applying for a status of victim of torture expires next week. And several women's organizations are now advocating for the deadline to be eliminated, as there are still many survivors who did not obtain their status and access their related rights. Bosnia has also not yet provided a compensation to victims of CRC. Only about 1,000 of an estimated of 20,000 victims have received some form of reparations. But even this is not compensation. Victims who have claimed compensations in civil proceedings have been rejected in application of a statute of limitations. And they are now even bound by the entity they have sued, in this case, Republika Srpska, to pay them high court fees, high court costs, in application of the simple procedural rule that the loser pays the cost. So the situation has led to a re-traumatization of victims who are being financially ruined and who are having even had their properties seized. But let me end with pointing to a hopeful example, demonstrating at the same time how long it takes. Children born of wartime rape have been stigmatized, discriminated, and left without support and legal recognition in Bosnia and Herzegovina for years. They remained invisible. And it wasn't until 2022 that children born of wartime rape were legally recognized for the first time as a special category of civilian victims of war in one part of the country. Another legislative change in another part of the country followed suit this year. And this was a precedent also at the soil of Europe, and also one of the few examples of legal recognition at the global level. It took thus 3 decades for these children to receive recognition. But it is still important. It is still a step which meant the world to them. A reason why we must not give up our fights even after such a long time as this.
Thank you so much, Adriana, and thank you for sharing that. And it is truly important and impressive work that you are doing, and not only important for you in Bosnia, but also for women in other parts of the world who can hopefully use the successes that you have had to improve rights elsewhere. And now I would like to turn to you, Dus, in DRC. And in DRC, there was no legislation, no services available when the war broke out, and survivors of conflict-related sexual violence received no support from the state. In fact, it took a lot of work for women's rights organizations and women journalists to even get the information about the mass violations out. What role has the women's rights movement and women journalists played in raising awareness around the conflict-related sexual violence in DRC? And what resistance did they face? You have to unmute, Dus.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the floor. I would like to say that the first challenge was to break the silence about the violence against women. As you said, it was really hard to find even information because no one was talking about it. And talking about sexual violence or forced marriages and gang rapes, or bring them to the attention of both the authorities and national and international media, was really a struggle. And when women journalists started to receive information about the widespread of conflict-related sexual violence from the start of the conflict, they tried to report on it, but international media and other local media, they refused to publish the stories. And the women who insisted on reporting about the violence received death threats from armed groups, while the states threatened to have their media outlets shut down. And there is one of the bravest women in Congo, Aziza, who even was one of the pioneers of women talking about it, who always give her testimony and say that one day she was reporting about the rape, and she was summoned by the rebel authorities. They said that it's this woman who is saying on the radio that we are raping women here in Congo. And they threatened her even with rape, and they asked her to give up. But she told them that she wouldn't. And she told them also that if they would be good, should also report about the good thing that they are doing. But as soon as they will continue raping women, she will be reporting on the rape about women. And they were really shocked by her courage. And other women journalists, we had really a lot of struggle to find even the right words to talk about rape in local language. Here we do speak in Swahili. This is the local language, and there was no words to explain what was happening to women. And a lot of people was thinking that no, it's about privacy, it's just sex. And we were like, no, it's not about having sex, it's something else, because you are introducing weapon in the sex of in the vagina and other treatments. It wasn't really a common behavior. And they had to borrow a word in Tanzania, where also the people do speak Swahili, to explain rape and what was rape. And that was like a kind of resistance, but also another form of resistance was linked to local customs related to the fact that people were not considered that sex as to be talking as they were considering it as an intimate subject, and talking about a fact that is related to sex was seen as an abomination. And even colleagues, journalists, was telling us that, why are you talking about sex on the radio? And we had even to explain them that it's not about talking about sex on the radio, it's about talking about rape. And it's not something that is related to privacy or to intimate relationship with about people, but there are a big a lot of people who are being abused, and we have to talk about it. And it was really hard to convince even the editors and the owners of the radio that this matter has to be talking about. So there was those kind of resistance, like people, they didn't talk as soon as it's related to sex, because in the local custom, it was like, we don't talk about it. And then we have to put out and have it, even photos of those women who have been raped, having their testimonies, and have to broadcast them was not an easy task. But thank God, as times was passing and people now began realizing that they are now raping men, they're now raping boys, and this is a common situation.
Thank you, Deuce, for sharing that. That is really incredible that you even have to start from that point in your struggle to even fight for the right to speak about what's happening and to be able to tell the world what is happening. And what else would you say, what other role has the women's rights movement had in, for example, documenting crimes or fighting for improved legislations or improved rights? And what have been the hardest struggles or most important victories in your mind?
Women's rights organization, they first made joint advocacy and pressure on the authorities, eventually forced the government to recognize that the mass violations against women and girls were a national problem. It wasn't a problem of women who are living in the eastern provinces, like in South and North Kivu, but it was a national matter. And then the monitoring of sexual violence paved the way for women's rights organizations to also start documenting them and sharing that information with the International Criminal Court. And they have been even one of the rebel authorities who have been sentenced by the ICC, thanks to the testimonies that women collected. And also that documentation was made to highlight what happened while the conflict raged. Was challenging also. The victims and survivors were afraid of reprisals when they have to give their own testimony, or they were also afraid to be stigmatized and to be even persecuted, because rebels were still around. And then if they knew that you are the one who gave that fact, they could come even and attack the victim. And also, other women rights organizations, they set up some projects or some activities, like for early warning activities. And there is one of the examples that are good examples here locally, the development of the Famophone project, that is a project to create and to connect members, women locally, and train them how they can report about any kind of sexual violence they could face, or gender-based violence, not only rape. And it is committed of 7 people representing the 3 communes, because here in Bukavu, the town, the city has the commune, and the structure has the mission to monitor sexual gender-based violence incidents in the city of Bukavu and propose concrete actions such as advocacy missions or other awareness sessions to combat SGBV, and aims to identify and denounce cases of gender-based violence and other violation of women's rights. But also have to mention that in addition, most areas where violations took place were hard to access for organizations that wanted to provide medical or psychological or social and legal support. This is also one of the main challenges. And as you were saying at the beginning, there was no legislation in Congo related to rape or gender-based violence. And around the years 19th, then women were like, how can we fight something that is not even recognized by the legislation? It could be really hard to find some solution for those women. If you want those perpetrators to be sentenced without any law, it could be hard. Then women's rights organization has to be, was supporting victims or survivors of conflict related and other forms of gender-based violence in Eastern DRC. And they decided to join their efforts and to advocate for the inclusion of the new articles in the Constitution, because in before 2000, there was nothing in the law, but in 2004, there were the first Constitution, and then they thought that rape and sexual gender-based violence was to be included also. So in 2006 and in 2011, there were 2 articles or states that talk about the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women and the protection and promotion of their rights. But this was not sufficient. It was not only about to eliminate discrimination. It was also about fighting really sexual violence against women. And this is why the women that were not silenced, as the topic of our report, they were not silenced, they continue fighting. And they went to the national parliament and in 2006, and the parliament passed the so-called sexual violence law. That was the first ever law in Congo. And there were a lot of amendments to the penal code to protect women against sexual violence. And that was a milestone achievement for the women's movement. And also, just years after, there was another consortium of women rights organizations that also came together, and they contributed to a new legislative proposal to address the law's shortcoming. And the proposal is based on evidence, information, and statistics on gender-based violence, because the first one was just about sexual violence, and then there were a lot of facts related to gender-based violence. So they had to make some statistics and information about it. And also, just last year, and there were also another success that we had here in Congo, when the Rien sans les femmes movement and other women's rights organizations successfully advocated for the introduction of a new electoral law to promote gender equality ahead of the upcoming election that are just coming soon in December. And also there were another law here in a few months ago in February that have been also promoted, and the law is related to conflict-related sexual violence survivors, and it's a law to protect them and to give a fund that can be helping the survivors. And this is also the first time in the Congo history that the government now have even a fund, just they set up a law that will give funds to protect survivors of sexual and gender-based violence.
Thank you, Dulce. Thank you so much for giving us those examples and really showing what difference the women's rights movements have made in DRC, both through their work with monitoring, getting rebel leaders sentenced, but also, as you're saying, all this long-term difficult work of changing legislations to improve the rights of women. Thank you so much. Now, the second topic that I would like to focus on now from the report is stigma. What we found is that in all our case studies, stigma has hindered victims and survivors from speaking up, seeking help, and claiming justice, which leaves many victims and survivors without any support and justice. Awaz, now I would like to turn to you. You work for that organization for Yazidi women in development in Iraq. In Iraq, sexual violence against women and girls is heavily stigmatized due to the country's deeply rooted honor system, which is also embedded in the legal system. Women and girls who have been subjected to sexual violence are often condemned by their community, and girls and women are sometimes even killed in so-called honor killings because they have been raped. This makes it essentially impossible for women and girls to speak up and report what they've been subjected to. This also means that when ISIS took Yazidi women as slaves, it took time before these horrific crimes became known, and it took a lot of courage for the victims and survivors who had escaped or been liberated to speak out and demand justice. The name of this report is actually a direct quote from you. When we interviewed you, you said they came together not to be silenced. Please, can you tell us, what did it take for the Yazidi women to come together and speak up?
Yeah, thank you so much. Honestly, until now, it's a kind of stigma for women or girls who have been raped to speak out and tell about what happened to them, because it goes to the something called honor killing, and it's still a problem in the society. But with the case of ISIS survivors, Yazidi women who have been captivated by ISIS was totally a different case here, because what happened to the Yazidi community, especially to women and girls, was completely something against humanity, because they have been really subjected to the horrific and unbelievable type of violence, particularly sexual violence. And I think all the world knows that they have been sex slaves, and they have been sold as a sex slaves, and they have suffered a lot while they are in captivity. Therefore, the Yazidi community and the Yazidi religious leader called Baba Sheikh, which is the leader of the Yazidi religion in Iraq and all the world, had the statement that clearly shows all the Yazidi survivors who were captivated by ISIS and raped, and all type of violence happened with them, are welcomed with love and warmth to the community again. And this, of course, was the point to give more courage to Yazidi women, especially Yazidi survivors, to speak up, because they see it's important to show to the world what happened to them, because it was happening to the thousands of Yazidi women in a lifetime when there is really a lot of development and a lot of humanity around all the world. They see it's important to come together to speak what happened to them, because what happened has already happened, and it's not important to hide or to feel shame because what this happened to them. No, they have another type of thinking, like they should speak about what happened to them, so these can be avoided later in the future, so they can prove their rights and rights of other women in the community, in the Yazidi community in Iraq and around the world. Because if they don't speak about what happened to them, they will not get their rights, and the word and the justice will not be happening. Therefore, we can see like two types of women were really standing for each other and trying to support women and to prove their rights. Women like us, women activists who were started working as a volunteer, then trying to establish organizations like DAC organizations and fight for women's rights. And we have other women, also Yazidi survivors, women from ISIS. Now, like, they are continually speaking for international conferences, from online in the community, and they are working by themselves also to try to speak for themselves, for their tragedy, and also for other women. So this is like shortly about why I say they decided to not be silent, because it is not good for them. Like they have been already violented in all the bad and horrific ways. Therefore, they want to speak and find justice for themselves, and find those who have been the reason of making them going through all these to be in jail or to be judged. Because if they keep silence, those people will be living freely in the community in Iraq or outside Iraq.
Thank you. And that is so hopeful that they have been able to speak up. And you also mentioned that one thing that played an important role was that they did get backing from the religious leader. And what would you say then have been the main struggles and most important victories for the Yazidi women? And maybe also what things are they still fighting for?
Yeah. Well, actually, the main difficult things was the crisis that happened, because we have a region called Sinjar, which is one of the biggest Yazidi region in Iraq and in all the world. All people there have been forced to displace, and thousands of them, of women, men, boys, girls, children, have been captivated, and a lot of men were immediately killed while ISIS is attacking. So the first and very difficult struggle was liberation of those captivated people, especially women and girls. Thankfully, like, thousands of them have been liberated, but we still have a lot of missing persons. We are not aware if they are dead or if they are still in captivity. And also, like, people until now, after 9 years, are living in the camps in a really very difficult situations, and they are unable to return to their original region because of unstable security, because of the region is still unbuilt, and there is a lot of lack of services there. And until now, a lot of them could not get reparation and compensation due to the difficult situation and delay in the process. And until now, a lot of survivors are suffering because they did not only are not still reparated, but they are not able to confidently, freely give their testimony in a legal way, because they have been until now threatened. If they talk about what happened in a legal way, they will be killed, or their families will be killed, and all these difficulties. Or sometimes when they open a file and try to give testimony, the results are not what they are. Like, they are not satisfied about the reasons. So those are really some difficulties. And in another way, the women rights organizations work are really somehow difficult, especially when they work on the field of gender equality or women rights, increasing women participation in decision making. We find a lot of difficulties, or sometimes it's unaccepted, because Until now, we could not really see gender equality in between men and women. So those are some general struggles that still available, existing there. If we talk about some victories, is the main one is the courage and self-confidence of the Yazidi women, especially Yazidi survivors, who could talk to the world, who could talk without hiding any single details about what happened to them. This was really supportive to make a change point in the community and to bring more support to women, especially women survivors. So they are so brave and we are so proud of them. Despite what happened to them, they are brave enough to talk their stories, to prove their rights and other women's rights. And another victory was, and we are really happy about the Iraqi government to pass the Yazidi survivors law. This is something really good for all the survivors, especially women, to get reparation. And the voice of women rights organization was really one of the reasons that could affect in passing this law. That is, we call it one of the unique things that happened out of this crisis that happened in Iraq. And of course, the positive supportive statement of accepting Yazidi women survivors back to the community was also, we are proud of this. And now you can find some networks, organization, humanitarian aids workers that are survivors from ISIS. So we have one network that called Survivors Voice Network, which all members who are running these networks are Yazidi survivors from ISIS captivity. And we have a lot of others, but those are the main things that we really see as them as victories, and we are proud of them.
Thank you so much for sharing this and for sharing the struggle of the Yazidi women. And we keep hoping that they will get more results in relation to the reparations and the new legislation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think you asked another question I may forget to answer.
I think that you gave us a lot of answers, but is there one last thing that you want to add? Or
yes, out of all these, like gender equality and increasing women participation in decision making in Iraq in general is something we are still fighting for. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Awaz. And there is definitely, as I said, the report, it shows that different types of stigma and different levels of stigma surrounds these crimes in all 4 case studies. And we see this as a problem throughout the globe when it comes to this type of crimes. But now I would like to move to another theme of the report. And that is what we call acknowledging other forms of gender-based violence. And in the study, we have seen that when actors do pay attention to violence against women in conflict, it tends to be limited to conflict-related sexual violence. And we want to highlight the importance of not only focusing on sexual violence committed by armed groups, for example. In our 30 years of working with women in conflict-affected areas, we have, for example, seen that domestic violence and intimate partner violence always increases and is exacerbated during and after war. And now I'm going to turn to you, Marta. In Ukraine, the government has acted rather quickly, actually, to investigate cases of conflict-related sexual violence committed by Russian soldiers and worked closely with the international community on investigating war crimes, which is great. However, your organization and other women's shelters have also seen a big increase in domestic violence as a result of the war. And this has recently also been confirmed by data from the Ukrainian police. Can you tell us what type of violence have you seen in the last year? And why do you think it has increased and also become more brutal in some cases? Marta, please.
Thank you very much, dear Jessica, for question, because I agree. After after the occupation of first territoriums in spring and summer in 2002, we started to hear about a lot cases of rape. We had a lot reports in media, and the state started to talk about rape, conflict related sexual violence and rape on the war. And it was a really big trend and let's say wave. This wave was supported by media, and we had heard very little about women's rights and survivors' needs, after that, this wave was subsided, and we started just now. We started in our organization have again increasing of requests by survivors about survivors of sexual conflict related sexual violence. And it is this is completely different quality of requests. There are women who experienced rape more than 1 year ago, and now they have PTSD, depression, complex trauma. They very often they apply directly. They directed by our colleagues who are documentators of war crimes and human rights defenders who work in the occupied territories. And just now, these survivors start to be ready to contact us and to ask about psychological support and psychotherapy, long-term psychotherapy. Regarding to domestic violence cases, we also have increasing of numbers of requests of women whose husbands are veterans. They came from front because they was they had contusions and injuries, and we started to have more and more requests about this type of domestic violence. These requests are also related to war and to trauma of war, because perpetrators very often begin to have alcohol or another form of addictions, and they also have psychological problems, and women and children suffer from violence, their violence. And in another hand, we have many heroization by community, heroization of veterans, and very often we have requests to women to help her husband, and because they are heroes, and survivors don't understand their situation. And we already have cases, court cases, when we have decisions, when court closed such cases because this case is insignificant, because perpetrators were veterans, and I think it will increase, and we start to do some information campaign for prevention such trends.
Thank you. And what role does your organization or other Ukrainian women's rights organization play in surviving these survivors and bringing attention to the problem? And also, what do you think that maybe the Ukrainian government or international can do more of to tackle the increase of also the domestic violence that is happening now?
Yeah. We see that domestic violence and violence against women start to be not important, let's say. State is tired from domestic violence. Sometimes they tell us, we have ratified the Istanbul Convention. What more do you want? We have a war. And we see that very often women, even women's organizations who worked with domestic violence, for example, now they refocused on CRSV and work with IDPs, and domestic violence is coming not important issue, and it's also not good because I talked about the trends, and and what we could do, we have to understand that a lot of new organizations started their work after war started. Very often a lot of funds came, and a lot of new NGO started to work in issues, and we need to increasing of qualifications and quality of work, people who provide services for women affected by war, especially with survivors of domestic violence. And I think it would be a very good direction to help Ukrainian NGO. We need long-term support from international community, and also very important is providing long-term psychotherapy and psychiatric programs for both for survivors and also for perpetrators, especially for military people who came after war. And we have now, I see the trends that organizations who works with veterans don't recognize this problem. They don't include in their programs, in their rehabilitation programs, this topic. And I think it would be very important to include this topic in their program.
Thank you so much, Marta. And thank you so much for really raising this issue, that also domestic violence is increasing, and it is as a result of the war. And as I said, it's not only in Ukraine that we as a foundation have seen this, we've seen this in so many other countries where we've been working for the last 30 years. And it's about time that donors and policymakers and the international community also recognize this and also give sufficient support to this. So thank you so much for raising attention to that issue. Now, I want to also talk about another type of gender-based violence that we bring up in the report, which is sextortion. And for those of you who are not familiar with the term sextortion or sexual extortion, is when a person in a position of authority abuses their power to obtain a sexual favor in exchange for something that the other person needs. And so sextortion is, in other words, both a form of corruption and a form of gender-based violence. Of course, in a lot of conflict-affected countries, there is not often very strong legislations on either perhaps gender-based violence or corruption. And unfortunately, in other countries as well, where there are legislations on gender-based violence and corruption, this crime tends to fall in between the chairs, let's say, of gender-based violence legislation and corruption legislation, and is therefore often left unaddressed. During the conflict in Eastern DRC, several cases of sextortion and sexual abuse by peacekeepers have been brought to light, as well as sextortion by aid workers and armed groups and international institutions and employers. Also, young girls are often subjected to sextortion by teachers in school, and this is sometimes referred to as sex for grades. Could you just say something briefly of how big of a problem is sextortion of women and girls in the DRC, and how does it affect their lives? And also, what can we do to stop this problem? Please, Dulce.
Thank you again, Jessica. And as you're saying, the problem is really huge. And to understand the triggers of sextortion, you must first fully understand the context. Like for some contexts, it's mostly about cyber security or sexual harassment through internet. But here in DRC, especially in South Kivu, in Bukavu, the manifestations of sextortion are really numerous. There are a lot of kind of sextortion, how it looks like. Often it's about men's jokes against women, and are really exaggerated orders from teachers or from leaders towards their subordinates. Others is more about the disparaging language, often in public, just to show that the woman is someone you can talk with as you want. And also the language of exaggerated appreciation, even in the workplace, every time you are cute, you're beautiful, you are sexy, and those kind of language. And also it happens through phone calls, slaps on the buttocks of women at every meeting, for example, or also exaggerated advantages compared to other female colleagues in the workplace. Another kind of manifestation of sextortion is the refusal to give salary or bonuses and social benefits only because the woman refuses to give sex back. And also the refusal to sell goods to women, even though they have the money. And this case happen often for women traders, because here in Bukavu, we are sharing borders with Rwanda and Burundi. And there were those small women traders who cross every time. And there are a lot of state agents who try to have sex from those women so their goods can also pass. And also there is the refusal to provide information for women journalists especially, and sometimes you can go and meet someone who has to provide you information, but he just wants sex in exchange of giving you those information. And also there is the refusal to supervise research work. And this happens at the university often, where the teachers can refuse to the student to supervise her work, or even a thesis or a dissertation, any kind of scientific work. And also in our context, there is this refusal to give work materials or even assistance and collaboration. So these are some kind of the manifestation of sextortion as really a sexual corruption. And this affects a lot the lives of women, and it can be related to their health, because there is a lot of sexually transmitted disease, because you are forced to have sex with people that you don't want to. And there are women who are like feeling ashamed or underestimated themselves. They have this remorse, and they can say that they feel really that they are worthless or they are useless, they are stupid, like they are being condemning themselves only because they did something that they didn't want to. And it can happen also that women, they say that as they had HIV, for example, now they are ready to spread it all around, and they are just having sex with anyone because she's feeling that this is the kind of vengeance she could give herself. And another effect is the physical or psychological imbalance. You know, when you think about it, you can even you can't have even appetite, you can't feel like you can eat, and psychologically your head is not stable and your feelings are not good. And also there is another effect is about early or unwanted pregnancies, and these are especially for young girls and even for grown women. And a lot of women can get pregnant only because it happened and she had nothing more to do. And these are one of the manifestation of sextortion and the consequences on the women's life. And when it's about,
Thank you so much. And I think that you're painting a really clear picture to us how big of a problem this is, and that it really affects women and girls in all parts of society in DRC. And I wish we would have more time to also talk about, you know, how to tackle this. But I'm gonna turn also to Awas on this question, because I think some of us, or a lot of us, have heard about, for example, DRC and some of the things that have happened there. But Awas, this is really a big problem in almost all affected countries, and also in Iraq. So I wanted to turn to you now and also ask, can you tell us about the sextortion that's happening in Iraq, and in what sort of situations are women being subjected to sextortion there?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Like you mentioned, this is really a recent problem in many countries, including Iraq. And we can realize that this is happening offline and online, especially in the workplace. And sometimes it's in the government offices, or unfortunately sometimes with organizations as well, because until now the community, which we call it dominated by men, cannot see women equal to men while they are having a position or being in workplace. They always try, even sometimes women are disturbed by some verbal words because they want to work in an environment that they are comfortable. So this is happening in different ways with many women, and unfortunately many times the women rights activists are receiving sometimes even threats because they are working in this direction. Sometimes people are requesting things. For example, if they don't do this, they will and the most common things and the most unreported things that's happening now is online, because this goes to, again, like because we are in the conservative society, women cannot even report what's happening to them. And this happens too because some of them are asking for sex, or some of them are asking for money, or another thing's favorite, and women are being under pressure and they cannot really go to the police station because, again, this is another type of taboo for them, and it is shame, and they cannot report, and either they will be killed, or sometimes, unfortunately, this leads to some kind of committing suicide because they don't know what to do else. So there is really these issues happening with women and girls, and not only in the workplaces, in general in the life, especially related to the online. Recently, it's very common, but people don't know how to deal with that or how to report that. And how can we tackle this problem in Iraq is there should really be existing legislation in the country that criminalize this online sexual harassment, because if we don't have legislation for these online sexual harassments and we don't call it a crime, we are not aware about these crimes, this will keep as a unsolved problem. And sometimes, unfortunately, some judges, let's say they are not having access to maybe network, they are not aware about the size of online crimes, so when they end up minimizing this type of crimes. That's why legislation and awareness for the people, and also for people working in the courts, in the government, for judges, for families, for girls, for women, awareness about these crimes is important. Having legislation is important, and making sure like women report if they are subjected to sex extortion in their work, in the community, or even online. Or also we should make sure that they protect their accounts, because sometimes this is also another type of problems that they easily get threatened, and this is happening sometimes from former partners, from hackers, and there is really like this is becoming a common and spread problem. I hope we can find a solution for that.
Thank you so much, Awaz. And as with so many other of these problems that we were talking about today, the importance of having legislation, of knowing your rights, and of being able to report is, of course, the way forward for this. And I would say, I guess that's the same in DRC and in Iraq and for the rest of the world as well. And now we will turn to our last theme that we cover in our panel today, which is the theme which links the work against gender-based violence with the work for peace and security. And for us at the Kvinna Foundation, it's very clear that gender-based violence does not exist in isolation from violent conflict, but is in fact a driver of conflict. It's also clear that the violence has to be addressed in order to build peace. And in the last 23 years, this has also been recognized by the international community through the adoption of numerous UN Security Council resolutions on women, peace, and security. We won't have that many minutes to delve into this, but I will ask Adriana and Marta quickly a question on this topic. Firstly, Adriana, what role has the women's rights movement played in building peace in Bosnia and Herzegovina? And also, why is the legal work that your organization and other organizations do on claiming justice and ensuring reparations so important for building and maintaining peace? Please, Adriana.
This is a very important topic. Women's rights organizations in Bosnia have, and very often those working on gender-based violence, have become important actors of peace. Decided to cooperate with each other very early on between different entities and across ethnic lines. And for their cooperation in addressing the needs of victims of gender-based violence and fighting for common purposes like the participation of women in public and political life, those organizations practiced also peace building. There was this common ground found by exchanging on the similar challenges women face in their respective communities, and by coordinating some joint activities trying to tackle those challenges. It has been shown that networking amongst activists and organizations at grassroots level fighting similar fights can be an important peace building tool. And essentially what they were doing was creating alternative pathways for communication, for coordination, cooperation, and for rebuilding trust in society. First of all, when it comes to the importance of the legal work for building and maintaining peace, it has to be emphasized that gender-based violence that took place during the war should not be analyzed and understood in isolation from the violence perpetrated before the war and after the war, because different forms of violence are all interlinked and reinforce each other. The war contributed to the spread of sexual violence. It was used as a weapon of war, but also for opportunistic and other reasons. But the structural causes of violence taking place during the war were already there before the war started, so that in order to prevent the recurrence of violence in peacetime and in conflict times, we need to properly address those causes and to tackle the systematic discrimination and repression that keeps women in a subordinate position in the society. So the same patterns that expose women to risk of CRSV remain also after the armed conflict is over. And they are even reinforced because the use of different forms of violence in the society is being normalized and brutalized. In Bosnia, for instance, domestic violence increased after the war. So if we manage to break this cycle, those patterns leading to GBV in conflict, to criminalize and appropriately punish gender-based violence, to establish a truth, to condemn it, to disseminate the truth about what happened, then we can contribute to prevention of violence in the future. If we speak about obstacles towards lasting peace and trust building, it is also important to say that there is hardly any bigger challenge than the lack of respect for the rights of victims, survivors, and all those who have suffered during the war. Many of our fellow citizens live every day of their lives in the agony of pain and the harm that the war left behind, and they deserve our full attention and support. Mass-scale violence also continues to have a long-term effect after the weapons have been laid down, and victims continue to be traumatized. There is a risk of it to become transgenerational trauma, which, if not addressed and if not healed, can contribute to future violence occurring. So this is also a reason why it is our obligation as a society to never stop searching for peace, for justice, for redress for the harm they have suffered. Transitional justice mechanisms have traditionally been perceived through the lens of their impact on the lives of those most directly affected, victims and survivors. But however, one has to bear in mind that the power of transformative justice is much more far-reaching, with the potential to affect broader socioeconomic development, state building, and peace. There is no choice about this. We cannot work on building the conditions for a prosperous future without proper dealing with our past. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for raising those important points, which really shows the link of this work to building a sustainable peace. And now, before we actually introduce our last speaker, who's going to have some final remarks, I will also ask you, Marta, what role do you think that Ukrainian women's rights movement can or should play in the reconstruction process of Ukraine? And what is the most important for your government and the international community to think about in building back the country? If you have some brief reflections on this, I think that would be a great last words from this panel. Thank you. Oh, and remember to unmute so we can hear you.
Excuse me. Yeah, we already have a few platforms with discussion about what we have to understand in process of reconstruction, what we have include, and we already are part of some such discussion groups, and for me very important is to understand that big money we will have big corruption. I hope not, but I think we have this situation. We will have the situation with corruption, and I think very important to develop some minimal standards, and I think very important is to include some monitoring process in all this reconstruction process, because we need to understand, for example, in our issue, we have to develop some indicators, minimal indicators, what have to be including in all the standards and all this reconstruction processes, and also international donors and communities have to have good monitoring indicators and process. For example, as we have monitoring process in different international, for example, convention, and also I think women's movement in Ukraine have to be include in this conversation, because what we see very often that state starts to understand renovation and rebuilding as building a new I don't know, businesses, and it's a big discussion, and I think it's not about building, and it's about people, and we have to understand that we will have very big big amount of vulnerable groups of people with trauma, and we have to understand what we could do in the best way.
Thank you so much, Marta. And I think that really sums it up. Building back Ukraine is not about building buildings, it's about the people and about making sure that we have an inclusive society in the future. And now I want to thank all of you who've been part of the panel for sharing your experiences with all of us today. As I mentioned before, you can read all the recommendations in the report that you find online. And now we have the honor to actually introduce a last guest and a very distinguished speaker who have been listening to all the brilliant things that our panel has said today. And that is the Ambassador for Gender and Diversity at the European External Action Service, Stella Ronner-Grubacic. And Stella, we are so happy that you are able to join us today, and we look forward to hearing what message you have from the EU. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And first of all, to all of you, my deep apologies that I couldn't be here all the time. I had many competing engagements today. One of them, actually, I would like to share that also with you, took me to Bruges, a city about an hour away from Brussels, where young diplomats are being trained. And I had actually the pleasure today to speak to these young diplomats precisely about the topic of gender and diversity, and therefore trying to make these young diplomats, who will in a few years' time will take up important positions in EU member states, to share with them my views about the importance of mainstreaming gender in our foreign policy, of always being aware of the gender dimension in the work that we do in our external action, but also in all the decisions that we take internally in the House. So again, I mean, I do apologize for being so late. I hope you will forgive me, but I wanted to be here, so I couldn't be here at the beginning, and I'm here now at the end, because I really want to share with you, first of all, my deep appreciation for what you have been sharing. But first of all, also, of course, thank you, Jessica, for the Kvinna till Kvinna report that I carefully read. And well, some of the key messages that I would like to share with you are, of course, that it is always important that we receive these reports like the one that you put together, to see to listen, to read the findings and the recommendation, and then also to have a discussion like this one today. Clearly, no one can provide better insights than you on the screen today. And this also is another, I would say, confirmation of how important it is that we on the EU side continue to support you, continue to engage with you, continue to fund also women's organizations, because of course your role when it comes to engaging, empowering, but also protecting women and girls worldwide, including in conflict areas, cannot be stressed enough. I really would like to say that at the beginning. And supporting civil society is really a key priority for the EU, because we really do believe that through funding, but also through dialogue and advocacy, this is where, ultimately I hope that we will reach a point where the issues that you discussed today will really be addressed, and hopefully actually the violence will be eliminated. I would like to share with you another key message, and I've been saying that in several fora already, and that is personally what you have discussed today, and what I believe is key, is that we need to address the root causes of gender inequalities and discrimination. It means we have to promote gender equality and women's empowerment in all our efforts and across all the policy fields. And there, I would also like to share with you my view that I hear often when we have a discussion about this, that, you know, more funding is needed, and more of networking is needed, and more giving platforms is needed. And that is all true. And at the same time, I really honestly believe that if we do not manage to address the root causes, we will not get there. You know, I really firmly believe that when we have discussions like the one you were having today about violence against women and girls, this finds its root in these deeply ingrained inequalities in our society. So we really, in a way, have to dig deeper, and to also, in a way, be more outspoken in that this is what is needed. I'm also saying this because, I mean, if I look at all of the things that we already have, we have an agenda on women, peace and security, and it's actually been around for a very long time now. But we still need to continue to raise awareness about these root causes, and we need to make sure that this agenda, for one, is really being used as an essential tool in ensuring that rights, but also the agency and protection of women and girls are observed and upheld all times. And something that I also discussed with the students and the diplomats that I was talking to today is, if today gender equality is still so far away as we know that it is, you know, where there are UN studies that point to the fact that if we continue at the rate that we are working on today, it will take us not 30 and not 50 and not 100 years, but no less than 286 years before we reach gender equality. So if we know this, if we see this as a fact, which it is, then the question really that we should ask ourselves is, and that we can ask ourselves is, so do we really do enough, right? Do we have the buy-in that is needed to get there? Or perhaps are we faced with a situation that we don't have that's required by buy-in, that we don't have the support, not only of women to do this, but also of men, who are definitely our allies, and who should understand that they too ultimately would profit from a society where there is equality and where we do no longer see space for violence like the stories that you have been sharing. So again, of course, the EU is all focused on some of the key things that are important to get there. I mean, which also means, and I should mention that we call for obviously for trauma-sensitive, victim and survivor committing approaches, that we want also to contribute to building a stronger global accountability system. And this is all, as I'm sure you discussed, in line with our GAP3, and therefore we have a solid policy framework to do this and to continue our work. But again, we see what happens. I see personally in my, you know, in the house that I work in, how things sometimes end up, and how continuously gender equality is forgotten or gets pushed to the margins. So I'm working on that, but I also, again, I'm truly convinced that to really get further, we need to really be able to address these root causes. And I think I would leave it there. I received some of your points for discussion, so I will really take that into heart. So thank you for sharing. And finally, but not least, I mean, really keep up this good work. Thank you for your courage, for sharing, and do let us know if you think that there is more that we can do on the side of the EU and how we should do that. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador, for those words. It means a lot to us and everyone who works against gender-based violence and for women's rights in conflict, to know that you're on our side and to know that you really want to help us dig this up at the root. And I want to echo you when I also thank the panel, this very brave panel, for all the hard work that you're doing. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. And lastly, I want to thank all of you who are listening, and once again encourage you to download the report and read it closely, look at the recommendations, and feel free to get in touch with us at the Kvinna Foundation if you have questions or want to know more about the report or our work. So thank you all so very much. Goodbye, and keep up the good fight for women's rights to live a life free from violence. Thank you.